Foreign Policy, 19th of October 2022, Chinese targets are in the crosshairs of Afghan militants. The China dream of Chinese President Xi Jinping is actually China's dreaming of imperialism, according to a recent article released by the Islamic State-Khorasan, the terrorist organization's affiliate based in Afghanistan. China has traditionally been a low-priority target for Islamist movements, but this may change. In an article published on September 2 in its English-language Voice of Khorasan, the Islamic State-Khorasan denounced China's global economic expansion and the mistreatment of Uyghurs. The report from the UN on August 31 describing China's oppressive measures against Uyghur and other Muslim minorities in Xinjiang was released shortly after the article was published. The Islamic State has just resumed discussing war after ceasing to do so. This critique of Chinese imperialism represents a new turn in the violent rhetoric of the Islamic State against China's expanding economic influence in the Middle East and Central Asia. In 2014, the Islamic State condemned China's Uyghur policies. The following year, Chinese hostages were executed in Pakistan. In 2017, the Islamic State issued direct threats against the Chinese government. But since then, the Islamic State has mostly ignored the plight of the Uyghurs and made no more statements in its media and propaganda calling for attacks on Chinese interests. The post by Islamic State-Khorasan indicates a new level of interest in Chinese actions among Islamist groups, moving away from an initial theological standpoint and toward political and economic considerations. It is noteworthy that the article refers to China's globalization as imperialism, expanding its criticism from a limited focus on Muslim persecution to claims that China, like other former superpowers like the United States, Russia, and Britain, seeks worldwide hegemony. The Islamic State-Khorasan offers a jihadi perspective on the imperial overreach of China's international economic expansion, echoing the dominant narratives about China's threat. The article compares Xi's iconic Belt and Road Initiative, BRI, to the historical British East India Company's involvement in Western colonization, describing it as equivalent to modern imperial expansion. In some ways, the discussion of the controversial China-Pakistan economic corridor in modern Indian discourse is echoed by comparing Chinese imperialism to historical Western colonialism in Central and South Asia. Rising Chinese economic development through the BRI is mainly seen as a danger to the West's global hegemony, which has also been called into question by Russia's invasion of Ukraine and a potential war between the United States and China over Taiwan. The Islamic State-Khorasan sees a chance to build the Islamic State's global caliphate amid the chaos of a switch from a unipolar to a bipolar world order. The paper argues that US-China worldwide competition and an unidentified regional rivalry continue to limit China's development to global domination, making Chinese imperialism more susceptible than historical Western colonialism. The piece, however, emphasizes the limitations of Chinese soft power, claiming that, in contrast to the Wild West, barbaric Chinese infidels don't have a richer history in terms of literacy and culture, and hardly seems to be possessing the language advantage for global conquest. The paper asserts that the materialistic and mercantile empire of atheist China, which contrasts with what it calls the transient Mongol Empire, cannot sustain its global growth and domination within the theological view of geopolitics. It also connects China's Belt and Road Initiative, which spans the Eurasian continent in the 21st century, to the historical Silk Road Initiative of the Mongols from the 13th century. According to the essay, the Chinese thugs will collapse in the same way that the Mongol hegemony did. The appeal for new contemporary strategies, rather than historical comparisons, may worry Beijing the most. The essay also covers methods to counter China's multi-trillion-dollar BRI global projects. The essay claims to remind those red atheists whose hands are stained with the blood of innocent Uyghur Muslims, signifying a direct danger to Chinese economic progress in the developing countries when referencing the shutdown of Chinese enterprises in Mozambique due to Mujahideen attacks. Threats from the Islamic State against China's BRI, particularly Chinese projects in Pakistan, appear serious. In Pakistan's southern Balochistan province, where Beijing has committed $57 billion for infrastructure projects, 2 Chinese citizens were abducted and murdered by the Islamic State in 2017. According to the article, Chinese imperialism primarily relies on economic and financial power, unlike Western powers that have mastered remote-controlled technology and remote-controlled militia, such as the Taliban, which the Islamic State-Khorasan views as a Western-backed rival. The article pays particular attention to China's overseas military capabilities. The essay uses terminology that supports China's portrayal of knife-wielding Muslim terrorists. It asserts that coward Chinese unbelievers won't be able to defend themselves against the sharp knives of the Khalifa warriors. According to the paper, potential Chinese responses to terrorist threats or attacks are considered. However, it claims, those Maoist cowards have not, and will not, master remote-controlled warfare as the Western nations did. This report claims that China's sole options are to spend money and remotely put up four-footed beasts like the Taliban Murtaden, which is an apparent allusion to Beijing's financial, rather than military, assistance for the Taliban. The Islamic State claims Khorasan that China is funding them most likely alludes to recent agreements between the Taliban and China, such as the construction of the Sino-Afghan industrial estate outside of Kabul, the restart of negotiations for the Messina copper mine, or the alleged oil contract signed with Chinese firms. The Taliban, Islamic State, and Khorasan conflict frequently center on two distinct yet connected issues: Chinese investment and Uyghurs in Afghanistan. It is implied by the Taliban's reported hesitation to deliver the Uyghurs to Beijing and China's lack of investment in Afghanistan that these issues are interconnected and sensitive to China, the Taliban, and the Islamic State-Khorasan. The dangers to each party's interactions with the other actors must be considered. The article's examination of Sino-American tensions and potential confrontation in the Asia-Pacific shows how important major power relations are to the group's strategic considerations, including a chance for the terrorist organization to attack Chinese objectives from Central and South Asia to Africa. Is it possible for the cowardly Chinese atheists to fight the West and the Islamic State at once, asks the article? The Islamic State of Khorasan has altered its narrative and strategy in response to a changing worldwide strategic environment, increasingly focusing on China for its promotion of Chinese imperialism and its repression of Muslim minorities. It is noteworthy that Beijing has not used military force to directly counter this menace or its prior terrorist attacks against the Chinese in Central and South Asia or Africa. In keeping with its international counter-terrorism strategy, the Chinese government has worked with Pakistan, Afghanistan, Tajikistan, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, and the United Nations to support counter-terrorism missions carried out by neighboring nations to deal with terrorist threats on the ground. In the future, the Islamic State in Afghanistan and other countries will appear to threaten China's dream and Western powers,